This week on the show.
So after I got laid off, I was like, I need to work on a reality show. And the only show I'd ever really watched was The Bachelor.
Naz Perez.
Ashley had got approached to do a podcast because this was, 2016. Nobody was really doing podcasts then.
Yeah.
And she had just come off of so many things, in the Bachelor franchise. And when the podcast network approached Ashley to do something, she was like, I know you want to host and you are a host. Do you want to do this with me?
TV host, producer, podcaster, founder of Heartbroken Anonymous.
I just started to think about wow, this concept of how strangers are just more willing to tell you how they actually feel sometimes than your own friends and family, because sometimes we're scared of feeling judged. I had this idea, wouldn't it be cool if a bunch of people who feel the same way could come together and make themselves feel better and remind themselves they're not alone? And that turned into what is now the support group that I run called Heartbroken Anonymous.
Yeah. Let's talk to Naz Perez on the Very Creative Podcast. Naz Perez, how are you?
I'm so good. I'm so excited to be here. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm really good. Before we start, I just want to say I just listened to your last episode of your podcast, and I definitely drink coffee before I brush my teeth.
That's amazing. Thank you. You are normal because I don't know anyone that wants to have minty coffee in the morning, but I love that. Thank you.
Yeah. So introduce yourself for everyone that's listening.
Yeah. So basically, my name is Naz Perez. I am a producer, a TV host. I founded a support group for people that are heartbroken called Heartbroken Anonymous. And one of the things I host is what you just mentioned, a podcast called the I Don't Get It podcast with my two best friends, Ashley and Lauren.
Yeah. It's girl talk, and it's a lot of great messing around, and I love it. It's great. It's funny.
Thank you. Yeah. We basically just talk about things we don't get. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say to the people listening, I've been a big fan of you for a long time because I watched The Bachelor, and you were a producer of The Bachelor on there. And I'm just so excited to have you on. Just really excited. I listen to your podcast, and I love what you do with Rotten Tomatoes. I'm like the Tom Hiddleston right now. That's like knowing you right now.
That's so funny. Oh, well, I really appreciate that. It warms my heart, and I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Yeah. I just want to start. I saw your Nespresso ad, and I was just like, oh, that's a fun place to start, because you said in that ad, I'm just a Dominican girl from South Florida, and I came to LA to follow my dreams. So I'm just wondering how you grew up and how you found your way to LA to follow your dreams, and what are your dreams? Yeah.
So such a big question, right? So I grew up in South Florida. I went to UCF for college, and I majored in broadcast journalism. And I didn't know until I went to college what I wanted to do. I think I always knew I wanted to do something related to movies and TV, because I grew up loving Disney. But I didn't know what that was. And then it wasn't until I went to orientation, when you go on a tour with your parents of the college. And the guy giving the tour was a broadcast journalism major. And I remember asking him, what's your major? And I was like, oh, you can actually study television in college. I just hadn't put two and two together. So I majored in broadcast journalism. And I think I just always knew I wanted to work in sports at the time.
Right.
I loved sports. And so, I ended up interning at different news stations and sports outlets when I was going to school in Orlando. And then right before I graduated, I decided I wanted to go into entertainment instead.
Yeah.
And it's funny because now when I think about it, sports and entertainment are really the same thing. They really are. People really like to separate it, but they really are the same thing. So I ended up moving to LA. I got an internship at the Ellen DeGeneres show. And from there, when I was in college, I was watching Juliana Rancic's True Hollywood Story. And I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. Like, I want to sit down and like interview people that are in film. Like, that just seems like such a dream.
Yeah.
So while I was working at Ellen, I drove to E and just asked them where HR was and like handed them my resume. And then a couple months later, got a call from someone that worked there to work an event for NBC Universal. So I didn't know that it was for E because NBC Universal owns, you know, Oxygen, Sci-Fi, Bravo, E.
Yeah.
And so I ended up working the event just to get my foot in the door and meet people at that company, because working at Ellen was incredible, obviously, but it wasn't my dream job. And I think oftentimes people get caught up in and they get comfortable in something that's secure or something that sounds glamorous or, you know, something that is very comfortable. And I was like, no, I moved to LA. Like, I need to go for what it is I actually want to do. So at the time I was living in my mom's friend's kids' toy room that lived in Burbank while I was working at Ellen. I was making like $9 an hour. And so when I worked this event for E, it just so happens, I took the day off from Ellen to work it. It just so happens that the person that was running that production was the same, you know, the directors and the executive producers of E Live from the Red Carpet. And they hire a group of production assistants, or they did back in the day anyway, every year to produce these shows for 3 months. So it was like a 3-month gig. And so after I had worked that event, they were like, you know, if you want to come work for us for 3 months, let us know. And I was like, oh, I don't know what to do. Like, Ellen had hired me, because what I forgot to mention is that I took an internship out of college, which a lot of people don't do, but I highly recommend because it's an easy way to get your foot in the door. Yeah. So when I worked at Ellen, it was actually an internship. And then I just made it known that I had already graduated and that I really wanted to work there. And within a month, they hired me as a production assistant. So that's what happened there. So I was like so nervous to leave Ellen because they had hired me, you know, and I was like, I have a permanent job in LA. Like, do I leave for this 3-month job? Like, that's so risky, you know?
Gonna leave the Ellen show.
Yeah, exactly. #1 daytime talk show at the time. And so for me, and like, you know, I was paying for everything on my own and I still do. And so it was really scary, but I did it anyway. I'm so glad I did. And I ended up working for E for those 3 months. And it was so cool because I was on the red carpet with Juliana Rancic, with Ryan Seacrest. And I think that's when I really started to fall in love with the craft of hosting. And when I say hosting, I think personally, the part that I'm drawn to the most is interviews, because there's different kinds of hosting, right? You can host a podcast, you can host a game show, you can host a talk show, you can be an anchor on the evening local news. What I really enjoy, the facet that I enjoy about my job is interviewing, because I really just like people. Right. And so I was like, oh man, this is what I want to do. And then of course, the day after the Oscars, because we worked the Golden Globes, the SAG Awards, the Grammys, and the Oscars. And then the day after the Oscars, the job was done because it was only 3 months long. Right. And so I had no job. I was unemployed and I was like, oh no, I'm gonna have to move home. Like, I was so scared. I remember just crying, like, did I make the right decision? I couldn't go back to Ellen. And so I just started to get creative, which I think is a really awesome place to be when you're at a crossroads in life. So, you know, when something doesn't go your way, whether you're going through a breakup or you lose your job, it's very sad and people grieve and they sort of are just down in the fact that something that they thought they were going to have is no longer there. But I think what people fail to recognize is like, it's a new beginning and it's a really perfect time to sort of reinvent yourself and work on yourself and grow. Yeah. And that's what's so annoying, right? It's like we hate going through it, but it does make us better in the long run. And so the fire that lit under my butt was fashion and sports. So I remember being on the red carpet with Ryan and G, or not with them, but, like behind the camera as a production assistant. And I just remember Ryan asking, Steven Spielberg and George Clooney and Ben Affleck, like who they were wearing. And of course, G would ask too, because he's very fashion forward and I love fashion. And because I came from sports and I always wanted to do sports when I was in college, I started to notice that a lot of the NBA players at the time, and I graduated, for context, in 2012.
Right.
So 2012, 2013, I started to notice that the walk from the bus to the locker room became like this fashion runway show for basketball players in the NBA. And so they started dressing to the nines. And so I thought to myself, well, man, if there's people out there that care about what George Clooney is wearing, there's got to be people out there that care about like what LeBron James is wearing, And so I started to read GQ magazine, and I've always had an affinity for men's fashion. I think women's fashion is really fun and it's versatile, but I think it's, unfortunately, sometimes it's harder for men to have fun with fashion because there's only, a certain amount of pieces. Well, now it's great that people are, let me just caveat, people can wear anything. So if you're a man, you can wear a dress, and that's like amazing. And I think it's incredible that society's really starting to embrace that. But back then, it wasn't as acceptable. People hadn't done it yet. And so what I'm trying to say is when men would wear things that would make me smile, I would be, it would just be really fun for me.
Yeah.
And so I was reading this issue of GQ in March of 2013. I think Bruno Mars was on the cover, and I was reading about this designer called War Air Boswell, who lived in downtown LA, and he was making custom suits for basketball players because they couldn't walk into, Chanel or Givenchy and like pick a suit off the rack because they're like 6'5", 235 pounds. And so I thought that was so interesting. So while I was unemployed, I just called him, I just Googled his number, and I was like, can I come interview you? And it was just one of those moments where you're like out of college, I've had one or two jobs, and I'm like, what do I do with the skills I have? And the skills I had was a couple editing skills, very, very basic. And I had a friend that had a camera, and he wanted to be, a videographer. So I had him come with me. So I interview War Air Boswell, and I end up editing this interview. And I was like, what do I do with this interview? And so I decided to buy a domain online called sidelinestyles.com, which I no longer have and no longer exists. I'm so sad about it. It got erased because I forgot to update it years later when I wasn't really doing it anymore. I wish I still had it. But in any case, and I started to just put interviews up there, and I started to cover what athletes were wearing. And it was really fun. And I felt like I had found my niche because there weren't people doing that at the time. I think there were 2 other websites that were doing it. So, when you're in college, they always tell you find your niche, what's your thing going to be? Right. What makes you different? And I think we get caught up in that a lot. And so for me, I was like, oh, I figured it out. I'm going to be the girl that covers the fashion side of sports. A lot of people aren't talking about this, but it's a thing that's happening right now in the zeitgeist. And so, so I started to do that blog. And then a couple months later, I got a call from E's True Hollywood Story department, which is a completely separate department. And they were looking for a production assistant and had got my resume from the live events department. And so thankfully, I ended up working there for the next 2 years and working my way up to be an associate producer. And True Hollywood Story was such a gem at the time. So many people loved it. And it was such a fun documentary series. And I really learned how to produce and how to interview and how to get the soundbite and how to, sew a story together from different interviews and video footage and archival photos. And while I was working there, I got a call from someone from the Style Network that summer of 2013. And they were like, hey, we need a girl to cover the ESPN Awards. It's called the ESPYs. We want someone that sort of knows athletes, but knows fashion. Excuse me. And we found your website. And I was like, wow, I did it. I have no agent. Like I just got called to cover red carpet. I'm 23 years old. And so I ended up covering the carpet and I was so nervous and I did really well. And I think it's because I had met War Boswell and through him, I sort of got to know different stylists for these basketball players. And it was just such a serendipitous moment where I covered the carpet. I did a really good job. LeBron won MVP that year and he was wearing a red custom War Boswell suit. So it was just all very like I felt like meant to be or sort of manifested in my head. And the Style Network was like, wow, you were great. Like, you know, I think we're going to kick off a new initiative called Style News. I'm not quite sure what they were doing, but I know YouTube was like big at the time. And I was like, wow, like I got my foot in the door. This is great. And then 3 years later, the Style Network got canceled. Oh, no. I'm sorry, 3 weeks later.
3 weeks.
3 weeks later after that, the Style Network got canceled. And I was like, oh my God, the entire channel is gone. And so that's just like, I think that's just like how television works. And it's an important lesson to learn early on. That like, if you want a dream job or if you want to work on a dream show, you got to know that may not exist when you're ready to do it or years from now. Yeah. And so TV and this sort of medium, it's always about the next best thing. There will always be hosting jobs, but it may be in a different medium. Who knows? We may all be on TikTok in 10 years, or something new, you know?
Right.
So anyways, of course, I was so bummed. Like, as you know, continued to work at True Hollywood Story for 2 years. And then the entire True Hollywood Story department got laid off at the end of 2014. Oh, no. And so from then, reality TV was just like taking off. And I was like, I got to work in reality TV or I'll always have a job. So that I will always have a job.
Before we go there, though, I just want to say, I commend you for I feel like you're a go-getter. And I feel like I relate to this. I feel like you found you were like, oh, I need to find my niche, but you are also showing in that you were like, oh, you're showing a creative side. I feel like that I really love. You're making opportunity for yourself, and I commend you for that because I feel like I'm the same way, and I relate to that, and I appreciate that, and I just want to know. Have you always been that way? Have you always had that creative side of thinking outside the box?
I think that's a good question. I think when you have to make things work, you do make things work.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like everyone's like that, but maybe not. You know, maybe people aren't like that. But I think for me, because my parents didn't have the financial resources to just pay my rent, I felt like I had to figure it out. But I've always been really driven by things I'm interested in creatively.
Yeah.
And so, of course, everyone's dream is to get paid for something that they really want to do. And I think for me early on, that was really important to me, to be able to, and it's not synonymous, right? Your job doesn't have to be your purpose or your favorite thing. That could be like volunteering or something else. For me, though, I was like, wow, if I can get paid to do something I really want to do, that would be really awesome. So, yeah, I think it's just a matter of circumstance, not having the financial, not having that financial resource, but also, always being creative, always thinking outside the box. I think a question I often ask myself is what doesn't exist now that should, where's the hole? And I learned that at UCF through the DeVos Sport Business minor. So I minored in sport business management. And my professors there, Scott Buckstein and Dr. Harrison, they run an incredible program if you're listening and you go to UCF. And it's just so much more about life and creating opportunity and following your passion than it is about learning stuff from a textbook. And so they were very influential in me sort of looking for the missing link and where I could fit into the industry and how I could make a difference, because we're all different and we all have our own voices. Right. So, so how, when you're sitting at a conference room, you have to think what in my life experience can I contribute to this? Like, what would my mom like? And especially in television, you're like, well, what would my mom watch? What would I want to watch? You know? And so when you ask yourself those questions, I think you go down a great road to some great answers, you know, because you're bringing your point of view to the forefront, which nobody else can do because nobody is you. Sorry, that was like a really long tangent.
No, I'm learning a lot from you, and I feel like, I love your answers.
Oh,
Let's go back to you were starting to talk about reality TV. So go ahead. I cut you off. I'm sorry. I just wanted to explore the creative side, and
I love that.
I commend you for that. So yeah,
please feel free to just like interrupt me because I feel like I can go on forever. But basically, so after I got laid off, I was like, I need to work on a reality show. And the only show I'd ever really watched was The Bachelor.
Nothing stays buried forever, especially not the past.
Yesterday is Not Yet Gone, a mystery novel by Gabriel Veiga, host of the Very Creative Podcast. Available now, paperback and digital. GabrielVeiga.com. Buy it now.
So after I got laid off, I was like, I need to work on a reality show. And the only show I'd ever really watched was The Bachelor. And I was watching Juan Pablo's season.
Right.
And I was like, wow, I love love and I love traveling. So like this would be a dream show to work on, you know?
I know, right? Yeah.
And a good important lesson that I learned early on in my career too is tell everybody what you want to do. Don't ask everybody to give it to you. Don't ask anybody to give it to you. But tell everyone what you want to do. And so I was at lunch with someone I went to college with. And I was like, man, I really just want to get into reality. I love the show, The Bachelor. And it just so happens the person I was talking to he's like, well, I live in the building with a line producer from The Bachelor. And I was like, wait, can you like set up drinks or like a coffee with me? Like it would mean the world to me. So I get drinks with this guy and he meets me and I basically just tell him like how passionate I am and how I've never worked in reality, but I would really I have so many great ideas, again, contributing my point of view, my perspective, something that a lot of other people can't do. And so he gets me a meeting with the executive producers. I get coffee with one of them and basically just say like, I came with a packet of like, I showed up to coffee with this packet of date ideas. And it was like all these dream dates that I would love to go on and how I think Bachelor is like sports for women. And again, tying it back to sports and something that I was like super familiar with. And I think also too, when you think you're unqualified, because I had never worked in reality before. I don't think it's good to harp on that stuff. I think it's good to acknowledge it. So I said, and you can say this too, if you're in an interview, like, you know, I don't have experience working in reality shows, but I can make up for that with my initiative and like my passion and all these innovative ideas I have that I feel like we can implement, you know? And so I think they just saw that I was like super passionate about it and gave me a shot. And so then for the next 2 years, I worked on ABC's The Bachelor, The Bachelorette, and Bachelor in Paradise. And it was a whirlwind and such an incredible school for producing, for life, for love, for travel. Like I was traveling around the world for 2.5 years, talking to people about love and heartbreak. But it definitely came at a cost because I was never home. I wasn't really sleeping and it's not really glamorous, you know, like you sign your life away. But I was making good money and I was learning a lot. And so then eventually 2017 comes around, or actually the summer of 2016, I think was when, I don't want to say over it, but I knew that I had to make a decision. I was on the beach. It was my second season of Bachelor in Paradise and I was like sweating. And I had like an IFB in one ear and like a walkie in another ear.
Oh, no.
And I remember just like staring at the sand and I was like, what am I doing? Like, what is my end goal? Like, this is amazing. This is incredible. But do I want to be executive producer of The Bachelor? And that answer was no. And again, it was the same thing that I felt when I was, this is all really like, if I could summarize this entire podcast and my entire life, as far as career trajectory goes, it's following your gut.
Yeah.
Right. And so I just had
important.
the feeling, and I think a lot of people don't, or they listen to other people in their lives or their parents, and you're just living your life for other people. When I was just like, I don't want to be executive producer of this show. That would be amazing. People would probably think I'm really cool. I'd make a lot of money. But that's not my end goal. That's not my dream. I moved to LA to be a host. And so you have to know when to walk away. And I think that's such a hard lesson to learn. It's so hard, whether it's in a relationship or a job, like you got to know when to walk away. And it all comes down to like loving yourself and like being your biggest cheerleader and showing up for you, because no one else is going to do it. So
it's so hard, right? Because you're like in it, and you have friends in it, and you don't want to let people down, and you're like, what am I going to do? But then also you have to follow your heart. And that's the most important part, I think, for your happiness. And I think what you're saying is you need to do that. You needed to do that for yourself.
Yeah. And I think people get caught up in like the technicalities, right? Where it's like, well, I have to work here because how would I pay rent? Or, well, I have to have a job, or I have to do this, or, well, I am really happy most days, it doesn't mean I'm not going to be happy and that's okay. I'm just saying that, like, I think we reincarnate as souls, and I don't want to get too existential, but I think as who you are today, this isn't a dress rehearsal. You get one life as you in the body you're in right now. As Gabriel, as Naz. So you choose how you want to live it. If you want to always wonder why, then that's fine. I'm not someone that wants to wonder why. And so I ended up leaving, and it was really hard, and I was unemployed. And I was like a wannabe host, and I literally fell into a depression. And I think I equated my happiness with success. And when I would tell people I'm a producer on The Bachelor, people would be like, oh, that's so cool. Like, blah, blah, blah. And like, I had money. And all of a sudden I was like, who am I? Like, what am I?
Yeah. You weren't happy.
No, but it's also like, we're not our jobs, we're not any of that stuff. So I did end up meeting someone, because I had never had a boyfriend at this point in my life. And I really, really wanted, especially like, watching people get proposed to on Bachelor, and like, go, hang out in a hot tub and go on these helicopter rides. And like, it's basically like I got paid to be the third wheel my entire life while I was there. So I was like, I want this, And so I met someone, and it was very like not stable, it was like, this person had gotten out of a relationship, just moved to LA. I don't even know how they really felt about me in retrospect, but I think I was so caught up in like a label and like, wanting like this thing. And so I really wanted to just like be a girlfriend. And after 6 months of like agony and anxiety and like living in the gray and never knowing if we were exclusive, he ended it, and I was blindsided and I was devastated. And right before he ended it, my neighbor actually knocked on my door, who I'd only met twice. And she lived with this guy next door. But again, because I was always traveling on Bachelor, I never really met them. I had like met her once or twice. And she was crying because they had broken up, and she just needed someone to talk to. And so I listened to her story. And then after she told me her story, she was like, I feel so much better talking to you, because I can't talk to my friends and family about this. And I was like, why? And she's like, because they're going to tell me to move on, or that I'm so much better. And I just started to think about like, wow, like this concept of how like strangers are just more willing to tell you how they actually feel sometimes than your own friends and family, because sometimes we're scared of feeling judged. And then this like light bulb went off in my head, where I was like, wow, that's kind of how we make The Bachelor. It's like the cast, we really get close with the cast as producers. And when you sit down and you're interviewing someone and you're talking, it's just a conversation. Yeah. And so, just sometimes you're more willing to just like say how you actually feel to someone you've never met before.
By the way, I've had a conversation with a Bachelor producer. Really? I wanted to be on the show, and last January, they called me. Yeah. And it was great. It was a conversation. You're right. And it was so, they make you feel comfortable. They really do make you feel comfortable. And No, you're right. I just wanted to tell you that.
Oh, that's so cool. Wait, so then did you not end up getting on?
It was Claire's season.
Oh
No,
my
they
God.
didn't. They didn't call me back. The producer was like, "Oh, I'm going to call you either way, if it goes your way or not." And yeah, she never called me back.
Oh, wow. Well, you
I was
know
like,
what?
Yeah.
Honestly, it's like I was reading this book, and there's a line in the book that I think is like it just really resonated with me. And it's for anyone who really wants something and it doesn't work out, whether it's a relationship, a job, being on a show. And the line is, when something you want meets fate, then like it's success, right? It's like something you really want and then it's fate. It's like successful. But it was saying that success isn't the absolute, because success can eliminate as many options as failure.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, success can eliminate as many options as failure. So this thing that you really want, if you get it, who knows what was right around the corner for you? You know what I mean? So yeah, I don't know if that helps at all.
No, it does.
I think it's an important thing to remember, that it always works out and the best is always yet to come. It's just hard to remember that sometimes, I think. So the last thing I'll share is that when my neighbor said that to me and I realized that's how we made the show, and then I went through my breakup a couple months later, I had this idea, wouldn't it be cool if a bunch of people who feel the same way could come together and make themselves feel better and remind themselves they're not alone? And that turned into what is now the support group that I run called Heartbroken Anonymous, which isn't a 12-step program, but it's a virtual support group. We meet twice a month. You can go
Incredible, by the way. Incredible.
Thank you. Yeah. And so I started it that year. So I've been doing it four and a half years now. I was doing them in person. Now it's virtually over Zoom. And it's cool because people from all over the world come, and it's not about giving advice. It's just about sharing and listening to stories of heartbreak to remind each other we're not alone. So if anyone wants to join, you just go to heartbrokenanonymous.com for info on like when our meetings are. But yeah, so it was like this beautiful thing came out of that breakup, and thank God I left Bachelor, because had I not, I wouldn't have became this host that I am today. And since I left, and it was a bumpy road in the last 3-4 years, I left in 2017. Yeah. So what is that? 18, 19, 20, 21. So in the last 4 years, it's been crazy, but now I host for the Dodgers and for Rotten Tomatoes. And I most recently hosted on E! Live from the Red Carpet, which is crazy. It was like the second job I ever had after Ellen. And now I'm on camera, or I have been on camera doing that stuff, interviewing people that are in the cast of movies. So it was all manifestation with hard work and believing in yourself and taking those risks and following your gut that I think led me here. But I'm also just getting started, so I still feel very new, and I have so much learning to do, and I want to grow as a host and as a producer. But yeah, that's where I am today, basically.
So funny, because a no can lead you to something better, Right. And you're like, oh, okay. Yeah, I'm glad I didn't do that, but because I wouldn't be here. Right. So yeah. And you said no to something, and you just moved on, and that created something else, which I think is amazing. And it's you also, like it's your brand, it's your thing. And yeah.
I think when people get scared of following their gut, a good thing to do is to write down the list of things that happened in your life when you have followed your gut. And then you'll realize like how incredibly blessed and how many doors opened because of that. And then maybe write down a list of all the times when you didn't follow your gut and what happened then. And that might be helpful.
Yeah. I'm so interested in how you started your podcast, if you want to share that.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. So
nothing stays buried forever, especially not the past.
Yesterday is Not Yet Gone, a mystery novel by Gabriel Veiga, host of the Very Creative Podcast. Available now, paperback and digital. GabrielVeiga.com. Buy it now.
So when I got so lucky. So when I left Bachelor, this was like end of 2016, officially beginning of 2017, like March of 2017. When I knew I was going to leave towards the end of 2016 and I was going to do my final show, which ended up being a spinoff show on Freeform called Ben and Lauren Happily Ever After, and then the twins Happily Ever After. Ashley had got approached to do a podcast because this was, 2016. Nobody was really doing podcasts then.
Yeah.
And she had just come off of so many things, in the Bachelor franchise. And Ashley, I'm speaking about Ashley Aganetti, who was a cast member on the show. And I was her producer. So I became really close with her, especially the second season of Paradise. And she just became one of my best friends. And then through her, I met her sister, who also became really close because they're best friends. And when the podcast network approached Ashley to do something, she was like, I know you want to host and you are a host. Do you want to do this with me? And I didn't even really know what podcasts were. So I was like, yeah. And we had to pick a name, and we would just always be in the car driving around LA, just saying like, I don't get it. Like we just complain about something and then say, I don't get it. And our biggest thing at the time was just, we didn't understand how girls got boyfriends because we were pushing like late 20s and we had never had a boyfriend. We felt like such late bloomers. And so we did our first episode on how girls don't get boyfriends, or how girls get boyfriends. Yeah. And it was so successful. Like so many women around the country felt the same way that were our age. And we totally had like tapped something again that other people I don't think were talking about at the time. Yeah. I think what's so fascinating and what intriguing about Ashley and what I loved about her the most was that she was so unapologetic about her love for Jared or whoever it was. She didn't care. She didn't care if people thought it was crazy. And I just think it's so beautiful to like really, really like someone and not care about what the world thinks, as far as like, if they think you should be with them or not, or whatever, she just wasn't like that cool girl. She just said how she felt. And so much of life now, especially when it comes to dating, is about playing it cool, and like acting like it's not phasing you and like your life's amazing. And, it's like everything in a Lizzo song, like posting traps and like, I won the breakup. And it's like, I don't know. We're just so not like that. We're like, what's wrong with telling someone how you actually feel? I think it hurts more that way, but I think it's more authentic and it's better to live life that way. But of course it's a preference and it's situational. But anyway, so we garnered all this interest, and through that, Lauren came on, and that's how the I Don't Get It podcast got started. And so we basically talk about everything that we don't get, from people that have like sugar daddies to, pregnancy to anything. And it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
I was just reminded how I found you guys, actually. It was just because I was watching my first season of The Bachelor was Nick's Vile season, and I discovered Ashley through our podcast. But I was like, I relate so much to this girl because she talks about never having a boyfriend. I never had a girlfriend, and no sex life, so I was like, oh, okay. There's someone like me in there.
Yeah, exactly. Wow. That warms my heart so much. And that's exactly it. It's like why society is so, I don't know if it's societal pressure, but it's like sort of looked down upon. Yeah. To say that. It's like, and everyone's always like, well, what's wrong with me? Or like, what's wrong with that person? And nothing's wrong with that person. I mean, we all have things we can work on, right? Maybe you don't love yourself as much, blah, blah, blah. But like, it's not, I just hate that so much of the conversation is what's wrong with that person, as opposed to like, oh, a lot of people are lonely and have never had this experience of being intimate with another person. And that shouldn't be weird. And you shouldn't be scared to admit that,
Yeah. So I was just so happy that this romantic show that was like Nick Vile's season was very sexual also a little bit with Corinne and everything. I was like, I don't relate to this. Like I love the show, but that's not my life. And then I was like, oh, it's not always like that. It's not always the fantasy suite and everything. Some people like don't relate to that. And yeah, so I was just, okay, cool. The show is as little variance, and it's not it's not always very sexual.
Yeah, I love that perspective. I love that you were able to relate to it in some way, like through Ashley. That's so cool.
Yeah. So do you still have fun doing your podcast, or does it feel like a job now?
No, it's super fun. I think the only thing that's sort of a bummer, and I think a lot of people feel this, is just Zoom fatigue, you know?
Yeah.
And I think now that Ashley and Jared moved out of LA, they live in Rhode Island now. Lauren moved back home to Virginia. So it's still super fun and interesting and thought-provoking. And I love that we have this community. There's over 10,000 members in the I Don't Get It podcast Facebook group.
Wow.
So it's a really great place to connect. And I love it. I just sort of wish, we all lived in the same state, but people have to grow up and move on with their lives. And it's incredible, actually, that we're still able to do it from 3 different locations.
Yeah. Well, I'm talking to you now, and you're in LA and I'm in Montreal. So
exactly. So it's like, there's so much good to it.
I feel like it changes the game, because like nobody would have thought about that like 5 years ago. Like, oh, it's all in person. And if you're not in LA or in the same spot, you can't interview those people.
Why did you think like that? It made no sense.
No sense at all. Yeah. Before I let you go, I just want to ask you about interviewing people, because you're a podcaster, you interview people for a living. So I just want to, I guess my question was, what have you learned from interviewing people? But I also want to know your process and everything. How do you prepare? And yeah, so yeah, 2 questions. So you can start with like, I guess your process, how you prepare. Yeah.
So it's interesting you asked this, because I think I'm always tuning my process. And I haven't found the sweet spot yet. So that's something that I actually struggle with is, I believe preparation is fear, right? Like you're so scared. So you got to learn everything and research everything and write down when they were born and wherever, everything. You got to know everything about the person.
I mean, I have your bio here. So like, it's like, I'm so scared. Oh, what if this interview goes, she doesn't talk? And I'm like, oh, okay. I have pointers here.
Yes. What if I have nothing to say? And so I think that that's great, and I shouldn't get rid of that part. But I think where that can sometimes get in the way is sometimes people are so scared, me included, where you maybe you over prep, and then maybe the interview or whatever it is you're doing is more produced than it should be. Maybe it should be just a little more human. And I think the best hosts are able to over prep, but if something incredible is said, then they just go that way, and they follow that. And I think that's a really hard thing to do when you sort of memorize and have this thing in your head and you're like, oh, I really want to get this one question in. You can choose to get that question in, but if you don't choose to follow something great that was just said, you could have gotten something so much better that nobody else got. Yeah. So my process is to read a lot and watch a lot of interviews that the person has done and just sort of get the essence of who that person is, how they like to answer questions. Are they short, with their answers, and, just sort of get a feel for things they've said before so I can try and ask something different and not get what's already out there. But what I'm working on is trying to just be more human and rely on Naz more. Yeah. And to just make it more fun and more authentic and just a conversation like you and I are having now. It's easy to do that with podcasts, especially when there's no video, because And there's some science behind it, but I think it's because when you're on video and when I do interviews on camera, you have to work extra hard to make sure your face is doing how you're feeling, you know, and you have to make sure your body language matches what you're saying. And I think when things are just audio, it just lends itself to have a more sort of just like relaxed phone call, you know?
Yeah.
So my goal, so last thing I'll say is my goal as an interviewer and what my dream is for myself is to create that intimacy and casualness that you would have on a phone call on camera.
Right. No, that's really great. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel it's sometimes like, because I'm trying to, like, I always try to have a conversation with a person, and like everyone, like no matter their following, no matter everything, like they're a person, and you're having a conversation with them. But sometimes I feel like when it goes awry, because you want to be like a person with that person, but if the guest is used as media training and just goes with that and just answers question like really fast, but I feel like what you said about watching interviews of them is a great preparation for that, because you know if they're going to do that or not a little bit, right?
It's also a good thing to remember, and something I learned working on Bachelor, which is another lesson, mini tangent right now, but when you're in a job that isn't your dream job, and I was working at Bachelor, I was like, how can I squeeze the most amount of juice from this job as possible? And to me, that was through interviews. I was like, well, if I know I want to host, then I'm just going to put my priority on like interviewing cast. And so that's important to remember, because at the end of the day, you're not always going to have your dream job, and it takes a long time to get there. So whatever job you're in, try and think of what is the one thing that can help you for that one thing you really want to do. Anyways, I brought this up because what is it that you just said? There was a point that I wanted to make.
The follower.
The point I wanted to make is that what I learned working on The Bachelor, and it's so funny because I do it, is we all build a script in our head. So for example, you asked me like my life story. That was all, like I've said the same words, the same sentences when I describe Heartbroken Anonymous.
Yeah.
Because it's not that I do it on purpose. It's just easy. You know, it's like, I know that I've said it that way before, and that's the way that it makes sense.
Yeah. And
so we all have a script in our head when people ask us questions like, how did you get to where you are today? And where were you born? And, you know, it's, if you can just listen to yourself, you can hear yourself saying the same thing. And so, what I haven't cracked yet, and what I think the best interviewers do, is they break that script.
Yeah.
They ask a question, and maybe it gets the same answer, but in a different way, where the brain has to come up with new words and new things to say. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's really hard to do.
I feel like it's really hard to do when you're not like Ryan Seacrest, or you're not a big name that people trust, I feel. No?
Well, I don't think, we have conversations with people every day. So you can practice with your friends every day. They don't have to know you're practicing. You could just be call up a friend.
Yeah.
I think the one important distinction to make, because you bring up Ryan Seacrest, and one thing I've had to teach myself is I'm not going to be as good as Ryan Seacrest because I haven't been doing it for 20 years.